Now the Philistines, we are in Samuel, 1 Samuel 17. Now the Philistines gathered their armies together to battle, and were gathered at Sokah, which belongs to Judah. They encamped between Sokah and Azkah in Ephes Damim. And Saul and his men of Israel were gathered together, and they encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in battle array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood, I'm going to paraphrase here, I'm not going verse by verse for this part. And the Philistines stood on one side, and the Israelites stood on the other side of the mountain. And a champion went out from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail. We're in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 6. And he had bronze armor on his legs and a bronze javelin between his shoulders. Now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels, and the shield bearer went before him. And he stood and cried out to the armies of Israel and said to them, "Why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And you, the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourself and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistines said, "I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. So, it's kind of funny to pick this as a sermon because it's like every child's teaching. It's about David and Goliath, but I was reading it to my kids, and there's some things that just were awe-striking to me. As we read this, I like to get perspective on things. We saw some numbers, and there were some shekels given and stuff like that. And this guy was big. I measured 9 feet, 9 inches. And you see that top piece of trim right there? The crown of his head would rest at the top piece of that trim. And he would be about this wide. If he was, I don't think he was a beanpole, so I don't think he was this big around. And he was a man of war. So his shoulders were, 4.5, 5 feet wide, and 9.5 feet tall if he was an average size average proportion. And I have a friend who's ruddy and good looking, and kind of, reminds me of David. Would you mind coming up here? Come on up. Make sure you crouch. Make sure you crouch. You're supposed to be 5'5", so look like you're 5'5". There you go. What do you think, Michael? Can you put that picture up on the screen? It's a picture of you, Michael. No. Okay, thank you. Thank you, my ruddy and good-looking friend. There's a scale, 5'11" versus Goliath. He was about 700 to 800 pounds. The world record grizzly bear stood a little bit over 9 feet tall. Now, the grizzly bear was a little bit heavy, a lot bit heavier. It was about 1,500 pounds because their bodies aren't the proportion of our body. But A good comparison would be to think of a fully mature grizzly bear. A fully mature male would be about 800 pounds and stand somewhere between 8 and 9 feet tall. I killed a black bear that weighed 250 pounds and was 7 feet tall, and I would not want to try to go after it with a stick and a stone. Okay, you can take that down. Actually, leave it up there for a little bit. It's good. The Israelites were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now, I love how God prepares a sermon with the worship. There was so much in the worship about victory in the Lord and about shepherds. I just loved, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, that I will fear no evil. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. And then Aaron comes up and talks about sheep, and that's what David did. David was not going to leave the one sheep in the mouth of the lion or the bear. We're going to find out. So we're going to skip to verse 20. You guys know the story. Jesse said the boys need cheese, and so he took a cart of cheese to the camp, and David brings it. Verse 20, so David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper. He literally goes from the sheepfold that morning, caring for the sheep, and took the things and went as Jesse had commanded him. He's submitting to his father. He's doing what his father asked. Okay. And he came to the camp as the army was going out to fight and shouting for battle. So this happened for 40 days. 40 days. That's a long time. Go out. Go away. Go out. Go away. I mean, but think about it. You're about to go start hacking and you're probably going to die. That, it takes some working up to get to that point. Not for Goliath, but for definitely Israel, if you're going to fight that guy. I kind of think of what strategy if they were thinking, okay, maybe if 5 of us went out all at the same time, trying to think of how they could get this guy. Okay, for Israel and the Philistines had drawn up in battle array, army against army, and David left his supplies in the hand of the supply keeper, ran to the army, and came and greeted his brothers. Then as he talked with them, there arose the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath, by name, coming up from the armies of the Philistines, and he spoke according to the same words. So David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were dreadfully afraid. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of love and of power and of sound mind. David knew that. So the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who has come up? I mean, you would. Surely he has come up to defy Israel. He has defied the chosen people of God. Now think about that. Where's another instance where somebody is defying the chosen of God? Satan does it day and night. And who is our champion? Jesus is. So the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who comes up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. I want you to underline defy Israel and see how many times that is referred back to. And it shall be that the man who kills him, the king will enrich with great riches, will give him his daughter, and give his father's house exemption from taxes in Israel. Then David spoke to the men who stood by him, saying, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him in this manner, saying, so shall it be done for the man who kills him. Now Eliab, his older brother, heard when he spoke to the men. And Eliab's anger was aroused against David, and he said, "Why did you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle." Unfortunately, this man caves to a very human tendency of when we are afraid to do something and somebody has the courage to do it that's less talented or less able than we see in our eyes we revile them. I mean, I would have a human tendency if I was like going to, not do something, and my brother, Jared, or Daniel, said I can do that, I would probably have a human tendency to kind of revert to this guy's response. I don't know if I would respond that strong, but Eliab was there when David got anointed over everybody else. Now, I don't know if they knew what the anointing was about, but Eliab was not chosen, and he knew he wasn't chosen. And then Samuel's like, "Isn't there anybody else?" "Oh, yeah, there's little Jimmy out with the sheep." And he watched his little brother get an honor by the prophet of Israel. So there's already probably a little bit of tension going on here. Okay. And David said, "What have I done now?" Isn't that a little brother's response? Oh my goodness. "What have I done now? Is there not a cause?" Man, I have heard that many times. In raising children, like, hear that from the bedroom. You're like, oh boy, better get in there. Then he turned from him toward another and said the same thing. And these people answered him as the first ones did. Now, when the word of which David spoke were heard, and they reported them to Saul, and he sent for him. So he started talking and saying, who in the world's going to stop this big mouth? And David starts telling people about it, and word gets back to Saul because nobody was saying that. Nobody in the entire camp was saying, who is going to stop this man from defying the armies of the living God? And so Saul hears of this courageous person. He doesn't know anything about him. Saul sends for him. And Saul said to David, Now the words which, verse 32. Then David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. Don't let anybody be afraid because of him. Let no man's heart fail. God does not want our hearts to fail out of fear because we think he isn't big enough to deal with the problems that we're facing. And Saul said to him, so I love David's perspective because he's looking at the giant and he's looking at God, and he's not really looking at him. But everybody is looking at David and the giant. They're comparing David and the giant. And David's not comparing David and the giant. David's comparing David and God. It's a good comparison to not compare you or your abilities or your what you perceive as humanly possible to the problem that you're facing, but compare the problem that you're facing to God. I love this. Oh man. As a child, when I was reading, I always thought, man, I want to be one of David's mighty men. As you read about this guy, he's somebody you could follow 100%. And you read about the stories that his followers fought into Bethlehem. And as they're fighting, they draw water out
of the well of Bethlehem and bring it to David for a drink, his men loved him a lot. He messed up. He was not perfect, but his men loved him a lot. Okay. David said to Saul, your servant used to keep his father's sheep, like 20 minutes ago. And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by the beard and struck and killed it. Whew. Wow. Impressive. He did not leave the one sheep behind. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. Again, Goliath didn't realize what he was doing. He wasn't setting himself up against a man. He was setting himself up against God. I defy the armies of Israel, of Yeshua. I defy the armies of Yeshua. Goliath pitted himself against God, not against a man. David recognized that. And David's like, who's going to go out there and do this for God? Moreover, David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. Right here we see into David's heart, the Lord who delivered me. Now, the sentence before, he said, your servant has killed both lion and bear. I went out after it and struck it. I went out after it and struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by the beard and struck it and killed it. But then in 37, he puts it in perspective, the proper perspective. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. So his brothers reviled him for keeping sheep. His father did not call him to be anointed because he was caring for the sheep. This seemingly unimportant, unimportant job had prepared him for the very task that God had prepared beforehand that he might walk in it. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear. It's so good for us to recognize that when we do something amazing in our lives, it was the Lord who delivered us and not our own strength and ability. Okay, let us remember 1 Corinthians 10, 3 through 5. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God, for pulling down strongholds, casting down arguments, and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. You could put Goliath in that category, couldn't you? Everything that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. Can you please play the video?
The poorest way to face life is to face it with a sneer. There are many men who feel a kind of twisted pride and cynicism. There are many who confine themselves to criticism of the way others do what they themselves dare not even attempt. There is no more unhealthy being, no man less worthy of respect than he who either really holds or feigns to hold an attitude of sneering disbelief toward all that is great and lofty, whether in achievement or in that noble effort which, even if it fails, comes to second achievement. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again. Because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds? Who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat.
If you guys don't know who that was Teddy Roosevelt. And don't be that person that after somebody attempts to do something great for the Lord, stands back and criticizes everything they did wrong. It's so easy, guys. It's so easy. Every person that has attempted to do something for the Lord in a carnal body did it imperfectly because they have a carnal body. But they tried. I think of Jim Elliott, Nate Saint, and many others who may have not done their ministry perfect, and so they were criticized. But their place will not be with those that do not know victory or defeat. And there is no defeat if it's done for Christ. If you haven't ever seen me teach, I cry every single time I teach. So Saul clothed him with his armor, and he put a bronze helmet on his head. He also clothed him with a coat of mail, and fastened his sword to his armor, and tried to walk. For he had not tested them. And David said to Saul, I cannot walk with these, for I have not tested them. So David took them off. Now, a lot of people will use that. Oh, David wasn't a kid. He could wear Saul's armor. You think about, okay, what is the armor of their time? It says it's a coat of mail, a sword, and a helmet. That doesn't mean that he was the same size of Saul, because you could easily put on somebody else's coat of mail, a sword, and a helmet. Very easily. And if you had hair like Michael, his helmet probably would fit. But, I've heard people, Saul was a head and a shoulder above everybody, and so David was a head and a shoulder above everybody because he could wear a coat of mail. No. I mean, look at Saul's response. He says, you are a youth, and he is a man of war from his youth. A youth is, I looked up the word, it's a youth. That's what it is. I would be disqualified. I'm no longer what he was. Unmarried, young man, somebody like 16. Those guys that sit over there. This is amazing. Then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in the shepherd's bag. He took what he knew how to fight with. God doesn't want you to be like some other person's ability. He wants you to use the abilities that he has given you. Oh no, this works for me. You've got to do it this way. It works for me. And I defeated somebody. I've never done anything that way. I've always killed the lion and the bear this way. Have you killed a lion and a bear? With your sword and chainmail? Okay, we have a lot of hunters here. We have a lot of hunters here. How many shots does it take to kill your animal? 1. Doug, how many times do you go hunting with 1 bullet? Ever. This will tell you the confidence that I have in my shot. Whenever I go hunting, I always fill my clip, put a bullet in this pocket, and a bullet in this pocket, a bullet in this pocket, and a bullet in this pocket, and a bullet in this pocket. I put a bullet in every single pocket that I have because I don't want 2 bullets clinking together and making a noise. And so as many pockets as I have is as many bullets as I'm bringing. What would you think of somebody, Doug, that went hunting with 1 bullet? Yes. What if they said, all I need is 1 bullet, so that's all I'm bringing? They're a fool, and they're proud, I would think. Yeah, it may work, but what if it doesn't? When I was reading this to my kids, I'm like, he took 5 stones. He had full trust. Think about this. He had full trust that God was going to give him the victory. He knew that it was Goliath against God, but he brought 5 stones and a staff. How do you kill somebody with a staff? Very close. As I grew up as a child, I watched Robin Hood, not Robin Hood Men in Tights, Robin Hood, the old 1930s and 40s actual English actors TV series, and they fought with a quarterstaff. And it's a valiant weapon. It's an amazing weapon. And I'm assuming that it was something like that. It probably wasn't a shepherd's, maybe it was a shepherd's crook that was taller, but he killed a bear with it. He didn't whack the bear on the head with his slingshot. So think about this. I have full trust that God's going to deliver this man, but I'm bringing 5 bullets and my stick. I don't know if we fully, what that did for me is that changed the perspective that David had. Jesus quoted in the Old Testament, reminded me of this. Jesus quoted in the Old Testament and said, "Do not tempt the Lord your God." David didn't want to tempt God. His faith in God drove him to attempt this great work, yet he was fully expecting a fight and was prepared for a skirmish. Why else would he bring a staff? Like I said, you don't kill somebody with a staff by throwing it at them. This is the other thing that our culture believes about faith that is absolutely false. He did not say, I'm going to deliver your beast, your body to the beasts of the field and birds of the air. And then close his eyes and go, he's dead. That's American faith, guys. That's what people say faith is. Just this blind God I have full of, that's not what David did. I'm not saying that God cannot do that. There was a battle where the king of Israel hid as a common soldier, and it literally says, and somebody went doing and shot an arrow in the air, and this guy had been prophesied that he was going to die, and he literally goes like, somebody at random shot an arrow, and then it's pierced him through the chink of his armor and killed him. So God can do that, but David knew that that's not what God wanted him to do. God can use those instances, but that's not how we act. When we pray, we should pray poignant. When we attack the enemy, we should attack poignantly. We shouldn't do it with our eyes closed in one bullet. Okay. James 2:17 says, I chose the more mild of the two texts out of James. You might want to go and read the other one. James, about what I'm about to read. Thus also, faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. David would be dead if his faith did not have works. Okay. 2 Chronicles 16:9 says, I love this verse. For the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth, to show himself strong on behalf of those whose heart is loyal to him. I really encourage you to go through the Blue Letter Bible and look at each one of these words. I don't have time, but I'm going to pull out two. The word strong is to grab hold of with all of one's strength. It is to prevail. It is to be full of courage. The Lord is looking for someone to grab hold of with all of his strength. On behalf of those whose heart is loyal to him. The word loyal is Salem. Do you guys know what Salem means? Peace. On behalf of him whose heart has peace in him. David's heart had peace in God, and God grabbed onto David and showed himself strong. To grasp with all of your might in a fight. That's what Samuel did to the donkey. That's what That's what, oh my goodness, I'm drawing a blank. Donkey bone killer. Samson. That's what Samson did to the donkey bone. Whenever they rent their clothes in the Old Testament, they grab their clothes and rip them. That's what they're doing, that word, to grab. And David has some pretty cool ones too, when you look at a word study. Joshua 23:6. Therefore be very courageous. That's the word, to grab. Be very courageous to keep and to do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses. We're supposed to grab onto the law and keep it and do it. That's what Joshua was saying. Lest you turn aside from the right hand or the left. As I was thinking about this word, I was thinking about, why would we have to grab onto it? Why does Joshua say to grab on? The best image I can depict in my mind is a ship in a very tumultuous storm. The waves and the wind are beating on the ship, driving off of its course, and the captain of the ship is holding on to the helm, grabbing it with all of his strength to keep the ship on course. And when the Philistine, then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and he put them in the shepherd's bag, in a pouch which he had, and his sling was in his hand. And he drew near to the Philistine. So the Philistine came and began to draw near to David, and the man who bore the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, spit on the ground, ruddy and good-looking, just like Michael. For the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" He didn't see the slingshot or the sling. And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with sword and with spear and with javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." David was very careful to add that part in the last. This isn't about me, Goliath. You've defied God. This day, the Lord will deliver you, just like the Lord delivered David out of the hand of the lion and out of the hand of the bear paw. Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcass of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air, and the beasts of the field, of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Then all the assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear or president. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. So it was, when the Philistine arose and came near to meet David, that David hurried and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. Now, Doug, when you aim at an animal, what are you looking at? A dot. You don't look at the outline of the entire animal and shoot. If you do, you usually don't hit it where you wanted to hit. You don't look at the animal. You look at the hair right behind the shoulder, right there. Now, it takes a really long time to get good with the sling that David was using. Very, very long time. But I've done quite a bit of research in it, and it is all hand-eye coordination. You hit what you're looking at. You've got to look at it. You've got to stare at it. You've got to focus on it. I believe David was looking right at Goliath's forehead, probably at a wrinkle on his forehead. He didn't run away from Goliath when Goliath started walking towards him. He ran at him. Don't run from the things that are in your life that defy the armies of the living God. With the power of God and the gifts he has given you, run at it and aim for its head. Aim for the root of the problem. If you're confessing something, don't confess around it. Confess the root. There's a verse for all the young kids in here that says, if you are faithful in little things, you will be faithful in much. And that is what David was. He was faithful to not lose any of his father's sheep to the best of his ability. And because he was faithful in that, he was faithful in this great task. Does this sound like running to you? Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Resist the devil, and he will flee. That doesn't sound like running. The world is trying to crash against our families, against our children, against our wives, against our relationship with the Lord. We need God to grab a hold of us as we grab a hold of the helm and hold on to it in his strength. He's looking for somebody, guys. He's looking for somebody to show himself, to show how strong he is. Grab a hold of that helm. Whatever it is in your life, you guys know what the troubles is in your life. Man, I just can't get over this problem. Whatever it is. I can't name all of it. Maybe it's an addiction. Maybe it's unconfessed sin that is in your life that you need to confess. Maybe it's somebody's that you're bitter towards, somebody that you have deep bitterness towards. I don't know what it is. There's a lot of things that it could be. But it's never going to get dealt with if you just run away from it. One of my favorite verses in the New Testament, Jesus just shows off his strength. It's one of the times that I just see Jesus rolling back his sleeve, going like this. I love it. When they're like, he casts out demons by Beelzebub. Jesus says, huh? No man can enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods unless he first bind the strong man. And then he can take whatever he wants. I love that about Jesus. That's just like, that is macho Jesus to me. Like, I love that verse. That Jesus is like, yeah, you're right. The demons are strong, but they're not a problem for me. I just love that. It literally makes the hair stand up in the back of my head. It's like that David moment when you're like, that's a man. His brothers reviled him for keeping sheep. His father did not call him to be anointed because he was caring for sheep. And I started over my sermon. Flipped the wrong page. I already read that. Yeah, we're going to start over, just go through the whole thing. Okay. Guys, I can't preach this sermon without thinking of the David in my life. That is my dad. As long as I can remember, he has attempted to do great things for the Lord that a lot of people thought were impossible. He's gone into many a battlefield with a sling and a stone. I can look back on my life and see many examples of bravery for the Lord as he's bending down on the ground, handing a tract to somebody that's holding a machete over his head. These stories are a living parable to me on how I can conduct myself as a man. Did he do it perfect? Absolutely not. But mine isn't the one to judge. how the man is in the ring. The person that's to judge is the one that gets in the ring with him. And I have been myself, honestly, guys, I have oftentimes been the person that's like, oh, you should have done that different. And this was really convicting to me. He's conducted himself many times. That's impossible, but not for God. So David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone, and he slung it and struck the Philistine in the forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the earth. I was reading the story of the world record. I was researching grizzly bears for this sermon. The world record grizzly bear, as of up till like 2020 or 2017, was shot in Canada with a .22 rifle. Not even a .22 long rifle, a .22 long, which if you know ammo, there's a difference between a .22 short, .22 long rifle. So the world record grizzly bear was shot with a .22 long. And this lady was out picking blueberries on Blueberry Hills with Sal, if you guys know that story. And she had this. It showed the picture of the gun. They have it in some museum somewhere, and it's this little dinky gun, just tiny. And there was this massive grizzly bear. It was the world record. She didn't know that. I'm sure she wasn't assessing whether it was the world record when it's coming to eat her. And so they hid, and it comes closer and closer and closer, and she's sure that it's onto their scent. And so she takes very, very careful aim about 2 inches back from its eyeball and up a half an inch, and shoots it in the brain. And she did not run out there and go, woo! She ran out there and emptied the rest of the ammo that she had into its head. And it was a single shot rifle. So she went boom, boom. And this was not a short thing. And you can see the skull on display. And it's every single one there's like all of these holes in the side of the skull right here, because she knew that was a soft spot. You can't shoot a bear right here. It doesn't work. You got to shoot it right here. And it was an interesting story. Anyways, you guys wonder why he cut his head off? So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. The word prevailed is the same exact word that God says. He wants to show himself strong. The exact same word. I love that. He wants to prevail on behalf of those whose heart is at peace with him. It's the same word. David, Goliath. You know exactly what that means when somebody does that, right? After a championship or after somebody wins a race, you know exactly what this means. And David did that with God. It wasn't David. I'm thinking that he was thinking, oh man, I am so glad that I didn't have to use my stick. Right? That's what I'm thinking. But there was no sword in the hand of David. The elders asked me if I was going to teach this, and I am going to teach it. Therefore, David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword and drew it out of its sheath and killed him and cut off his head with it. And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Okay, the camp of the Philistines has their hope, their faith, their everything that they have courage in is in this guy who has yellow hair. I don't know if he has yellow hair, but anyways, you get my point. Don't put your courage and your faith and your trust in a man. I don't know who's going to be the president. God can use him, God can't. But just the same exact thing, David was going, you're defying the armies of the living God, and God's going to deliver you into my hand. Not me, not by my might, not by my strength. It's God's strength. Don't put your faith in a man, because as soon as that man is gone, you run. That's what happened to the Philistines when they saw that their champion was killed. They hightailed it. I love that the same word is used. It's just so great. Such a good example of that verse. David is a living parable of that verse, and there's so many more. What I want to think about, guys, is how many people in the New Testament, this is the same story as the martyrs of the New Testament. Because our weapons are not carnal, but are mighty and powerful and able to take down strongholds of the enemy. We're not out there fighting with a sword anymore. This is the Old Testament is a physical example of what's happening spiritually. And Stephen had a victory just like David did. And many, many, many times you can see in the New Testament the same story, just in the spiritual realm. Okay, I'm going to finish up here. A few examples that shouldn't be passed over quickly. My cousin had a brain tumor, and we all prayed and we all aimed right at it. Not physically, but spiritually. And it's gone. It is gone. What is it for you guys? It's good to go home and think about. If you don't have Goliath in your life, that's great. I'm glad you don't. Is it an addiction? Is it a broken marriage? Is it a broken relationship with a brother or sister? Perhaps it's a ministry that God is calling you to. And it seems completely impossible. Whatever and wherever the enemy is occupying and saying, I defy God in this area of your life. Ann Wigman, all of these stories that we had fresh up here were examples of the enemy saying, I defy God. Don't let them do that. Don't let the enemy have that place in your life. Are we trusting God and fighting in those areas, knowing that God will lay hold of us in strength? Lord, I pray for our team that is gone right now. I pray that you would lay hold of them in strength. Lord, what you're doing in that country is hitting Goliath in the head. And we have a stick and a stone. But you're on our side, Lord. Lord, please go before them, protect them, and Lord, use them, grab a hold of them, and wield them so that you will be shown strong. Lord, help them to have peace in you. Help us to have Salem, to have peace that you are in control. Lord, I'm fully convinced that if David died, he would still have peace. Just like the New Testament believers, Lord. Help us to have peace in you. Lord, help us not to be the man on the sidelines sneering, saying, you could have done that better. You could have done it this way. But to get in the arena and fight for you. Fight for our children. Fight for our wives. Fight for our families. Please, Jesus. We love you. Thank you so much that you never leave us nor forsake us. Please help us not to forget that. If David would have forgot that, he would be crippled, just like the rest of the Israelites. But he didn't forget, and he was able to do mighty exploits for his God. Help us to do mighty exploits for you. Amen.